This is a series called Greatest Music of All Time.
Oh, well, then what am I doing here?
Well, it's been a little while since someone said that very modest line. That's what Seal said as well.
That sounds like him. He's a modest guy for sure.
But you're very deservedly here, and congratulations on your new record, Exodus.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about that. Was this recorded, presumably recorded before lockdown and everything?
Yeah, so we've actually finished the album probably, so my last show was February 15th. We finished the album about 2 weeks before that. So we had heard about this coronavirus thing in December, but you know, in the kind of like bird flu or H1N1 back in the day, we didn't really think that it would be possible. It wasn't even part of our thinking in any way that the world would be shut down at some point. So we went around, you know, business as usual. So when shows started being canceled and things started, it was kind of crazy. This, again, 2020 has been nothing like any of us could have ever imagined.
Yeah, for sure. It's been completely, yeah, it would have been ridiculous to say like we were living in some kind of fantasy nightmare if we were to tell 2019 versions of ourselves where we'd be.
Yeah, which makes me wonder about the 2022 versions of ourselves, how we're going to remember and how the world will actually change. Because as I go around the country, different places, there are varying kinds of how people are living with it. You know, we're down in Florida on the beach, and you wouldn't think there was a pandemic right now, the way people are walking around. But as we talk to our friends in Los Angeles, it's like Beirut 1982. You know, the streets are bare and it's crazy. Just, you know, thinking how different parts of the country, different parts of the world are handling this. It's definitely a different, all of it. I can't believe it.
Yeah. So in Florida at the moment, it's pretty not normal, but you know, closer to normal than elsewhere, is it?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And it makes you wonder what to believe, to be honest with you. You read the statistics, the numbers to me don't seem to add up, but we're conditioned to believe that the people in charge know what they're doing, right? And
Yeah.
that's across the board. Somebody smarter than me has figured this all out. And when there's, you know, here in America where 6 billion people have contracted, but 150,000 have died, even though that's less than 4%, I think somebody knows what they're doing and we'll keep locked down in this whole thing while the economy continues to plunge and all this other kind of stuff. But people, I think, and I've heard, because we have a daughter that's 22 in college who's in her senior year, the kids are like, look, if I get it and die, fine, I'm going to live my life. And I think that that's what a lot of people are thinking after this much time has gone by. And I'm just waiting to see what the final definitive thing is going to be here. And then all of a sudden you hear that, I know that's not what this is about, but we got on the subject.
No, right. Interesting. And people, you know, people are interested to hear what great artists and people who they respect think about this.
You know, to button it up, I would just say I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing, but I don't think it's wrong for me and my family to be as safe as we can possibly be in just in case it's worse than what we think. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hopefully sooner rather than later, from my mind, it will go more towards personal choice on the matter rather than like state enforcement on the matter.
That's true.
In any case, I hope all our listeners are staying, you know, safe and well, right. And you know, and listening to Brian McKnight for sure.
Yeah,
help them keep safe and well.
Stream Brian McKnight. Stream. Yeah, that's my new mantra moving forward.
You know, you've made a run of like brilliant records recently. Like, you know, it's only been 2 years since Genesis, right?
Right.
So what made you want to make another record? And you know, how do you keep your voice sounding so good after all this time?
Okay, so the first question, Um, I've never decided in my career to put out a new record. Um, I write all the time. So when I finish a record, when I think a record's finished, it's not like the spigot gets turned off. New songs come in almost daily. And since I met my wife, they come in 3 times daily. So from Better right into Genesis, right into Exodus, we live our lives. And, you know, having finally now having a real muse, which I never had in my whole career. You know, my whole career before Leilani was, I have this many notes and this many syllables, and I'm just trying to reinvent the wheel from a standpoint of, I never liked anybody, even though that's the thing about me. I wrote all these love songs, but I didn't think love existed outside of a movie, outside of a song. I'd never seen it, I'd never felt it until the day I saw my future wife, who is now my wife. So you can imagine that for 8 years, I don't have to think about writing songs anymore. I just live my life. I look at her and it's a song. She's blow drying her hair, and that's where nobody comes from. It's the most incredible part of writing in my life, because I don't have to think about charts or think about finishing records or deadlines. I just look at her and music just appears, and it's the, you know, it's the easiest songwriting time of my life. It's because it just happens, and it doesn't have to be thought about. It doesn't have to be anything. So that's this trilogy of Better and Genesis and Exodus is just a continuation of the love letter that I have for my wife for finally making my heart beat for the first time in my life.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so joyous as well, because you know there's a lot of emotion in your earlier work for sure, and you know, and you carry it very authentically. But you know, it's nice to know that at this stage of your career, it's like it feels like you're enjoying music more than ever.
More than ever. Because it's not, the music really isn't the focus anymore. You know, the career isn't the focus. Anytime something happens organically, I think you're going to enjoy it a lot more, because everything else is forced. When you know you look at a record like Back at One, coming off the success of Anytime, it was really about trying to duplicate that. It wasn't about the songs. It wasn't about some statement I was trying to make. It was really just, how do I go from 2 million sales to 4 million sales? You know, what can I write that will go #1 on the chart? And there's a pressure to that makes it not fun. There's a pressure to this business in general that isn't fun. So you can imagine that, you know, for these last 3 records, to be able to just create and to have that be completely organic has been the greatest joy of my life, because I also get to share this music with Leilani as well. You know, when she listens, she knows, because she's in the room when I'm writing. She's in the studio when I'm recording, because it's in our house. You know, it's, you know, I'm doing my vocals right upstairs in the room, and she's sitting right there. So I can look at her, and I can, you know, as I'm writing the lyrics, I'm saying, baby, you have to hear what I just wrote, which has never happened in my life. I've never had anybody in the room in my life while I'm writing. I send the engineers out, I send everybody out, because you never write a song in a room full of people, because somebody will say, hey, what about putting "and" there? Now they become a writer. So
Yeah, for sure.
you know,
It's off-putting.
so it's great.
If you don't like their idea, then it's like,
No, exactly.
I can imagine that you wouldn't want that during your creative process. So
No.
that's really cool. For my listeners, who, you know, might have heard your like classic songs, but might not be, you know, familiar with the kind of the level of your talent, like musically, how many instruments do you play?
So I actually play 9.
9 instruments.
9.
I think that's the
But
most amount of instruments I've ever heard anybody play.
well, I think Prince played like 27, so he's got me beat
Prince
by.
played 27. I knew he played a lot, but I didn't know.
He plays
I
a
didn't
lot.
know there were 9. Wow. Okay, but
But
9 is still pretty cool. Don't worry.
like him, for most of these records that I've done, pretty much everything that you hear is me playing. And it's not because I'm some sort of weird control freak. When I started in this business at 18, I didn't have any money. So I couldn't pay musicians to play. I couldn't, I had enough studio time that I had to get it done quickly. It's really more about time than it is about being a control freak. I needed to be able to record 5 songs in 2 hours. So having, the ability to play made it, and I wasn't the greatest player in the world. I've continued to practice. I continue to learn new things about all the instruments. I'm self-taught as well. So, I really just had the time and I had access to instruments, and I've always been that kid that wanted to figure things out no matter what it was. And I never thought that when I taught myself to play that it would be for a career like this, but it just kind of worked out that way.
That's so cool. That's so entrepreneurial as well, to just be like, right, I've got this studio time and I'm going to make it happen and I'm going to learn the instruments and I'm not going to, pay session musicians if I can't afford it.
Right.
There are a lot of people who just be like, right, well, I can't do it then. I'll just become a session player. I won't become an artist. And how did you learn to play so many different instruments? Did you learn to read or did you play them all by ear?
So I play them all by ear.
Wow.
When I was in high school, I had a band that we would play, at churches. We play some gigs around town. And after our rehearsals, I would take the other guys' instruments home. So that's how I learned to play. I had a guitar and we had a piano in our house, but playing bass and drums, that's something that you really need to have that at your disposal. So after rehearsal, I'd keep messing around and keep messing around until I got it, till I got some semblance of being, at least the rudimentary things that you need to know. There was no YouTube then. So I couldn't just go and figure out what people were doing. It would have been a lot easier if I really had that kind of instruction. But I just used my ears and, like most people, I listened to records and I played along with the records and learned to play.
That's awesome. And what were the records that you were listening to that inspired you to make music? And what records did you learn to play along to?
Oh man, it's the same records I listen to now. So every Earth, Wind and Fire record, every Stevie Wonder record, every Donny Hathaway record, every Doobie Brothers and Michael McDonald record, James Ingram. So as I'm learning these songs and learning to play, I'm also learning to sing like my favorite heroes as well. So when we talked about my voice, I think when you're a singer, the most important thing from a musical standpoint you need to do is to take care of your instrument. And my instrument is my voice. Staying in shape is important for breathing, to be able to hit those notes that you guys hear on the records. It'd be difficult to do that if I wasn't in some kind of shape. And my wife makes sure that I stay in shape. And then just always practicing, never thinking that I'm good enough, never thinking that what I've done is good enough, to always, stay ahead of, practicing and thinking of new ways to do the things that I do. Is a little game I play with myself. Even though there are all these people that say, oh, you sing so great. I was like, well, okay, but how can I be better? How can I get better? How can I find a new way to do this thing that I've been doing for so long? And I think it's that mentality that keeps it going.
Yeah, it's a very inspiring mentality to have for sure. And so, as well as staying in shape, do you have to do like vocal exercises and things like that before you sing?
Not really vocal exercises. I do vocalizing. So there are a couple of songs during my sound checks that we'll do that I need to know how much of my voice I have today. And this is the thing that people don't know. I very rarely have 100%. When you do 150 shows a year, like I've been doing for the last, 25 years, some of them back to back, you're going to lose a little something every day. So there's a couple of songs that I'll do. There's a Stevie Wonder song called "I Can Only Be Me," which is a very rangeful song. So if I sing that before my show, it gives me an idea that, okay, I have 85%, so I can't push it here. I can hold back here. I can, hold this till the end of the show. So I make sure that I have it. So there's a lot of mind games that go along with making sure that you're at your best, even when you're not at your best.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what, you just do a couple of tunes in the sound check and you're just like, how's it feeling like?
Yeah.
And like,
That gives me a really good, and then the funny thing is, once people show up and that energy, I liken it to athletes. If you're watching the NBA and you're looking at the bubble, it's hard for some of these guys to get the energy up that they need to play every game because they can't rely on the audience. See, for us, at least for me, once the audience gets there, if I'm at 85%, I'm probably going to be at 100 because you're looking at these faces that are expecting greatness, and you can get to that point, but you just don't know if you have it yet at soundcheck because nobody's in the room. But once they show up, the adrenaline, your excitement, the songs, the anticipation, hopefully that brings out the best in you as well.
Yeah, I can imagine it. It would definitely, in sound check, if you've had it, if your throat, if your voice is feeling like it's a bit worn out, or you're tired from back-to-back shows and stuff, a sound check must be a completely different feeling to the end of the show when people are going crazy and stuff.
Right, exactly.
So you like signed your first record deal when you were 19 years old.
Right.
So that, were you working up to being a professional musician like really hard before that, or was that like, did it all happen very quickly?
I think the signing happened quickly. I think that the actual releasing of a record was the hard part. I think we all have an idea of what it must be like to sign a record deal and put a record out. And we think, okay, I'm going to sign a deal, I'm going to put a record out, and immediately I'm going to be playing Wembley. Well, it doesn't work like that. At least not when that may be the case now in some ways, just because you can become super famous now almost seemingly overnight because of social media in a lot of ways. And it's a very different world. But when in 1990 or 1989, when I got signed, it took 3 years for that first album to come out. And in that process, I didn't really know why, but looking back on it now, I needed to develop. I needed to figure out what Brian McKnight's sound was going to be. And Ed Eckstein, who signed me, he knew that. He didn't tell me that. He just signed me, but he gave me the time to develop. So by the time I was 22 and that first album came out, I think I had defined who Brian McKnight was a little bit, at the very least, with One Last Cry and songs of that nature from that first album. So it seemed like it didn't take long, and I got signed, but I'd already signed a publishing deal before that. So when I signed my record deal, I had very strong ideas about what I wanted to do as an artist if I was going to be an artist, because I would have been happy just writing and producing for other people. It was the label that then said, hey, who's writing the songs? Who's singing the songs? Do you want a record deal? And I was like, okay, well, let's try this. Because I also thought that at some point I'd go and play professional basketball. So I was like, I'll do this until I do that. And then, we'll see what happens. But it didn't work out that way. But I'm glad the way it worked out, because I think it gave me the time to develop my sound, and a sound that I think I've kept, for almost 3 decades.
And for those probably relatively few listeners who haven't heard Brian McKnight music before, how would you describe it? How would you describe that sound? It only occurred to me the other day to ask this question to people, and it's quite challenging, I guess, isn't it?
It's just, what words do you put it in? I mean, I could put it in musical words. I mean, if you like Stevie Wonder and you like Steely Dan, I'm right down the middle of that line. Those two artists are my two favorites, and I've tried to write in the middle of that be Billy Joel as well. So somewhere in there is Brian McKnight. And I think in my chord change choices and my melodic choices, that's where I've sort of departed from those other guys a little bit. But I could take you through every one of my songs and tell you and show you who I ripped off in every one of them. Because there's nothing new under the sun. I may just do it just a little bit differently, but we are all products of everything we've ever heard or ever seen.
For sure.
So it'd be very difficult for me. I mean, there are very few people that I could say, man, I don't think that music is based on anything, because they were so original. I think that's Stevie Wonder. Before Stevie came, I can't go back to something before him and say, well, that just kind of sounds like this. I think Mozart's another one of those people when you think about classical music. But for the rest of us, I think we've all imitated until we figured out who we were. And then you sort of go on from there.
Well, if that is the case, although I couldn't tell that you particularly were, that kind of ripping anybody off. Sounds original to me. But if it's the case, then all the names that you've mentioned so far are, you know, such brilliant artists. Do you so because like your initial period of like really big success was during the 90s. You know, would you consider like did you listen to other bands in the 90s? Are there any other artists from that era that you really respect?
Oh yeah, so many of them, almost all of them, I would imagine. I think the 90s was probably the era of the greatest, and it's not just because it's my era, but the greatest music I think that was ever made was created in the 90s. So, you know, right before the 90s, you have Bobby Brown, which I think his record sort of changed. His solo record, Don't Be Cruel, changed a lot of the way we all created music. And I think a lot of that has to do with LA and Babyface and their producing, because that was sort of the beginning of their reign of probably 15 years as a writing and producing team that is unparalleled. So you have them, and then you got Boys to Men, you have Guy and Jodeci, myself, Joe, R. Kelly, Mary J. Blige, so many great artists. We're not even talking about hip hop, because this is the era of Puffy and Biggie and Tupac and the originators of everything that's happened since then. So you have all of these all of these artists sort of converging on this one decade, which was the sort of the taking off point for everything that's happened since. I listen to everything, and I'm a sponge where that's concerned, but as much as I respected what everybody else was doing, I really had to stick to my guns and do my thing, because it would have been, I mean, it would have been easy to call LA and Face for Jimmy and Terry and say, look, man, I need a song like that, you know, Sensitivity you did for Ralph Tresvant. I need something like that. Instead, I was like, well, how can I compete with those songs doing my own thing? And I think there were a lot of artists that did that same thing, trying to carve out their own sound, like Joe. Joe is another one of those guys, or even Mint Condition as a band, Tony as a band. People that still played instruments and did their own music and had their own sound, and it was regional. Even when Jermaine Dupri came with the things he was doing out of Atlanta, you know, you had an Atlanta sound, a New York sound, an LA sound that was really, you know, prevalent at that time. It was fun to make music in the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, the breadth of the artists that you've just mentioned, you know, people always do go on about the 70s and the 60s and, you know, even the 80s, and quite rightly so. But, you know, the 90s did have such a kind of, breadth and diversity of different genres.
And really, I've only talked about, you know, R&B music. If we start talking about Nirvana and
hip hop as well, like
hip hop and the rock from the time when grunge came, I mean, grunge killed the hair band. I mean, come on, you know, Bon Jovi and Van Halen. By the time, you know, Nirvana came along, it was over for so many people, because that Seattle music just killed everything. The coffee house music, you know, the Lenny Kravitz of the world and those things. I mean, there's all this great music.
There's Britpop as well in the UK.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Oasis and stuff like
right.
huge. And the down the line pop music from the 90s was great too.
Oh
like,
yeah.
People listened to so many different things, and all of this stuff charted. Whereas now, I think fewer genres end up charting. But yeah, it's been great to talk to you, Brian. Thank you so much for doing this. And you know, if you were to name just one song of yours, like a deep cut that you would like people to listen to, or perhaps maybe a song from your new album Exodus, what would it be?
Well, there would be two, and this will give you the essence of Exodus. One would be Nobody. Nobody to me is the greatest love song I've ever written. And then Bad. Bad represents the day that my wife and I met, in a comical sort of way, in a rapper that's very 1972 Stevie Wonder. So you have those two things right there in front of you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. And I hope you're able to get back out there soon and, you know, start playing 150 shows a year again.
Okay, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Crossed. Bye. Keep well.